Introducing. Eh, Bienvenidos a una nueva conferencia del ciclo de conferencias de la Cátedra de Estudios Judíos de la Universidad de Buenos Aires, la Facultad de Filosofía y Letras. Hoy tenemos el placer de compartir con todos ustedes una conferencia dedicada a un tema muy específico, el cual es el pensamiento judío y la música judía en el Renacimiento y el Barroco italiano. Paso entonces a presentar a nuestro invitado. El doctor Piergabriele Mancuso es licenciado y máster en Lenguas Orientales, es máster en música, en viola, es doctor en Estudios Judaicos, dirige actualmente el programa judío Eugen Grant del proyecto de archivo Medici, los archivos Medici en Firenze desde el 2013. Es profesor titular de historia de la música y de estudios judaicos. Ha impartido clases en diversas universidades de Italia y Estados Unidos. Ha publicado numerosos trabajos sobre la historia de los judíos italianos. Entre ellos destaco el dedicado a el filósofo Donolo, que pude reseñar, la filología judía medieval, la música judía y la etnomusicología. En el año 2017 puso en marcha el proyecto de cartografía del Gueto, un importante proyecto de investigación cuyo objetivo es reconstruir virtualmente el antiguo gueto judío de Florencia a partir de la documentación textual de los archivos. Fue co-curador junto a Alice Leger y a Sefi Hendler de la exposición Los judíos, los Medici y el gueto de Firenze. Historia, identidad, cultura y segregación, que fue editado por el propio Palazzo Pitti, la Galería de los Uffizi, en octubre del 23. Bueno, hecho esta presentación, benvenuti, vi invito a godervi questo piacere intellettuale.
Well, thank you so much, everybody, and thanks, Pablo, for your presentation. Very generous and very kind, as you are all the time. It's my pleasure to be here with you today because this is the first time I'm lecturing or meeting people in Argentina, a country whom I have never seen in my life, but who many people that many people told me is beautiful and gorgeous, and that I should go and visit. So my goal is to bring myself to Argentina and to see and to meet Argentinian people. And many people told me Argentinian people are very nice. So this is if Pablo is like Argentinians, I think it's absolutely true. So I'm very pleased. So it's an honor to be with you today. And as I said, I will speak in English because we have technical issues with the automatic translation. But if you want to speak to me in Spanish, I think I will understand. And if I don't understand, Pablo or someone else will help me with the translation into Italian. So today's talk, the main topic today is Jewish music in Italy during the Renaissance and Baroque time. As you can imagine, the Jewish music repertoire and Jewish music repertoire in general is very complex. It's very complex. When we focus on Italian Jewish music, it's something very specific, very tiny, but it's not. So let me tell you very briefly that today we'll be limiting our analysis to a number three, four, basically music event that took place around the 17th and the early 18th century in Venice. Why in Venice? Well, because we need to find a limit in order to discuss the topic of Jewish music in Italy during Renaissance and Baroque, because Renaissance was a major phenomenon, phenomena that took place all over the country, more in the center of the peninsula, but also in the north, eventually also in the south. Baroque is a big issue. So I decided to narrow down the focus and geographically limit my view on Venice or to Venice. There is also a sort of a parochial reason for doing that, because I am from Venice. I was born in Venice. I know Venice very well. And because I wrote a small book about Italian Jewish music in Venice in 2018. So I wanted to exploit the idea of Jewish music in Venice and to see how these tiny events can be taken as paradigmatic of what happened in the Italian peninsula from the standpoint of Jewish music more generally. So let me tell you very briefly something that maybe you know very well. What is Venice in the 16th century? We are speaking about a small city-state surrounded by tiny, tiny strip of land. You can see over here, this is the city. Originally, Venice is only the islands making up the city, surrounded by a small buffer zone around the lagoon as a sort of protective area. But in the 16th century, due to a number of reasons, to a number of diplomatic, geographical, geopolitical events, Venice expanded dramatically so as to include the entire northeast of Italy. So what is basically nowadays Veneto, Friuli, plus a big chunk of Lombardy near Milan, excluded, by the way, the so-called Dalmatian territories, down to Greece. I would say a good portion of nowadays Greece included the Peloponnese over here, Candia or Crete, Cyprus until 1570 when the Ottoman Empire conquered it, and many, many, many ports all over the world, I would say. So we have a number of ports or strongholds or emporia in the Black Sea, in the Mediterranean, in front of the Middle East, North Africa, Gibraltar, North Europe. So this is as important. Why am I speaking about Venice in the 16th century, and what is the reason for doing that if I have to deal with Jewish music? Well, the reason is that, as you know, in 1516, the Senate of the Venetian Republic decided to give to the Jews a place where to live. A place where to live is a sort of a euphemistic or euphemism. The Venetian authorities decided to force the Jews to live in a small island, not far from the city center, but not in the city center. And this island, as you know, is a sort of a pentagon over here. The detail is over here, but this is a 16th century map. And you see the different main points. You have the arsenal, basically the engine of the Republic, St. Mark, which is basically the political, religious, but also commercial center, because the port of Venice was here, was beside the Ducal Palace. Rialto, the financial center, where the money was exchanged, information were exchanged too. As you know from Shakespeare, The Merchant of Venice, beginning with what news from the Rialto. So why Rialto is so important? Because in the 16th century, Rialto is one of the centers of the world. Eventually, the Gueto over here, which is at the periphery, I would say far from the city center. Far means basically 20 minutes walking, which is nothing, of course, but it's far from the city center. The point is that why the Gueto is created in 1516? Well, first of all, there are a number of reasons. At the beginning of 16th century, Venice became an enormous power in the mainland. Let me go back to the previous slide over here. So most of these territories were conquered in a short time, and Venice expanded as a state in a few decades, but then was attacked by the very famous Ligue Cambrai. The Ligue Cambrai was a league, a federation of armies led by France, Spain, and the state of the church, aiming to conquer the Venetian state and then to destroy Venice. What happened during the conquest of this big chunk of territory? A lot of people left the mainland and they went to the coast, and they were trying to find a shelter, eventually going to Venice, basically augmenting the population and making Venice a more populous city, with more people living in the city, including Jews. Why Jews are going to Venice? Why exactly the Jews? Well, because the Jews were the first to be persecuted during the conquest in the mainland. So Jews living in Vicenza, in Verona, in Padua, they left immediately before the others, the Christians, basically, because they felt the danger of being physically attacked. Something not new. Okay, we know that happened all the time. So the Jewish population grew very dramatically, quickly in a short time. And then the Venetian authorities decided to give to the Jews living in the city center, in the whole of the city and in the whole area of Venice, a place where to live. This is not necessarily segregation. At the beginning, as Venice did before and will be doing later in the future, assigning to a minority a specific place where to live is not necessarily a sign of segregation. It's a political or administrative practice. Basically, if you want to solve a problem with a minority, instead of expelling this minority, you will be hosting the minority in a specific place with a specific set of norms or laws. So this is something I would say absolutely unexceptional and normal. But why is exceptional this sort of assignment? You know, the ghetto was created on 29 March 1516. Why is so important? Well, because for the first time, Jews are given a place where to live. And since this island is the foundry of the state, producing cannons and guns for the battleships in the arsenal, that area was called the Ghetto. Ghetto with J and one T, only one T. So when the Jews were forced to live in this area, according to specific norms, you know, the normal ghettoization, you can leave the area during the day, but have to be inside during the night, and a number of other norms, mostly developing what the canon laws, the laws of the church had established long before this date. Well, the ghetto became the first area that will eventually become a paradigm for the others. Since the first inhabitants of the ghetto were Italian Jews and German Jews, but mostly German Jews, mostly coming from Nuremberg, from Munich, and coming to Venice for different reasons, not only because of the conquest in the beginning of the 16th century, but also because they were traveling, going to Venice to be merchants, sometimes to sail and to go to the Holy Land, okay? Since the first inhabitants were German Jews, these sweet J became G, and then they doubled the T from ghetto to ghetto. So this is something absolutely, I would say, well, from a political standpoint, normal. Then later it became abnormal. Well, because I mean we have a number of multiple measures. The Jews are not Christians, living together with Christians since the beginning of Christianity, even before. You know, the Jews in Italy, Jews have been living in Italy since the 2nd century before Christianism. So we could say that in Italy, Jews are the most Italian people. So this is something that happened long before. So there is a problem in dealing with the Jews. Being infidels, they're not supposed to live in the city of Venice. I mean, together with the Christians. So how do you justify this inclusion, sort of incorporation? The Jews are allowed to stay in the ghetto in this island only temporarily. In theory, at the beginning is only a temporary permission. But there is another point, a political point. When you force someone to live in an area, when you force someone to stay in an area, and when you force someone to follow specific rules, and when you force someone to leave the city center, houses inhabited by other people, Christians, most of the times friends and fellows, business people together, you need to justify the reason why these, forced movement. This is something that we will find in the constitution of any Italian ghetto Could it be the Roman ghetto, the Florentine ghetto? Every time the authorities, even though they're allowed to do whatever they want, and then even allowed to expel the Jews and even allowed to segregate the Jews, they need to justify the reasons why they're doing that. From a political social perspective, also the Christians might perceive these forced movement as a sort of a wound to their own prerogatives. Basically, when you see someone, your neighbor, being forced to leave the house and to go elsewhere, you need to be explained why this happens. Otherwise, you might feel that the government, your state, is mistreating him or her, but also you eventually. So they need to justify segregation. And in the Venetian constitution of the Ghetto, basically the deliberations of the Senate of Venice, is written something very, very interesting. We'll be reading together. I don't know why you see some lines over here, but can you see this text? Ulterius. I'll be reading the text very shortly in Italian, or it's not really Italian, standard Italian, in ancient Venetian standard language. Ulterius, moreover, essendo cosa vergognosa ed è pessimo esempio che essi giudei hanno fatto per tutta la terra sinagoghe, dove si riducono cristiani et cristiane et cantano li suoi uffici alta voce, cum universal esclamazione, e da ciò i desordini preteriti non procedino più in avanti, sia preso che ditti giudei non possino, sotto alcuno pretesto, forma, ovvero ingegno, che dir o immaginar se possi tenere sinagoga. Basically, I want to, to shorten the text. It says, moreover, in addition to all the reasons that we spoke about before in the text, basically, they are infidels, they are potentially very polluting, spiritually speaking, the good Christians. There is another reason, ulterius, moreover. We found, basically, that these Jews have synagogues in the city. We don't know exactly where, but supposedly in the city center, inside the houses, don't know. The point is that the Senate told us, and inside these synagogues, where Christians are not allowed to stay, this is one of the fundamental rules of segregation. Remember, even before the ghettoization of the Jews, according to the canon laws, Christians are not allowed to attend a synagogue service, okay? They're not allowed to eat together. They're not allowed to pray together. They're not allowed to live together, as Shylock said in The Merchant of Venice, okay? They said, in the synagogues of the Jews, we found Christians, both men and women, staying together and singing their offices. Alta voce cum universale exclamazione. Well, basically, they were singing together with strong voice, with a sort of a universal harmony. Wow, what it means. From a musical standpoint, in terms of music semantic, we don't know exactly what it means. Is it polyphony? Well, if you have different voices, you have male and female voices, you easily do polyphony. This, from a social and political standpoint, which kind of violation we have over here? We have multiple layers of violation. First of all, we found Christians attending the services, basically the Jewish services in the synagogue. Big scandal, is a big scandal. But second point, we have men and women together, which is even more scandalous. It's more of a sort of a outrageous action. Well, men and women together praying in the synagogue and singing together, these Christians with the Jews. Oh, that is too much. And this is why, according to the authorities, the ghetto was created. This is why the ghettoization, the forced movement or immigration or whatever, the forced whatever of Jews from the city to the island was ordered. So this is a fundamental point, okay? You are justifying a segregational movement or process. Remember, the authorities could do anything. The Jews are not citizens of Venice, as they are not subjects of the Grand Duchy in Tuscany when the third ghetto will be created. They are not subject of the Pope when the ghetto, the second one in Italy in 1555, will be created. So they have no rights. you could do whatever you want. You can expel them, as they did in Spain, 1492. But the point is, socially, you need to explain why this is happening. And here, music is involved. Now, I checked a lot of sources. I checked all the inquisitorial sources. I mean, maybe I've lost some of them, but in, let's say, 20 years of research, I never came across an inquisitorial trial or a document speaking about these, strong violation. Remember, the Inquisition has not two eyes, but multiple eyes. Even though Venice is a secular state, limiting the power of the inquisitors. Remember that, at least formally, Venice is very Catholic. So more than 100 churches for 120 islands. So you need to be very careful. You need to be very aware that mixing together is not allowed. So is this something that really happened? I can tell you that it is not absolutely not true or true, but I can tell you that I haven't found a single document justifying these events and these deliberations at all. So my hypothesis is that in order to justify something very serious happening in Venice, the authorities decided to invent, to create a case. And this case came out of music. So when you invent, when you pretend that something happened, it's really a pure invention. It could be, but normally if you invent, so haven't found a trial inquisitorial case that would have been natural in this case, but I found a lot of documents speaking about music schools held by Jews and attended by Christians, or dance schools led by Jews and attended by young Christians. And I found eventually some trials where these masters or teachers were questioned for taking the students and pupils near Judaism, or for sort of an attempt to not to convert them, but to cross the border of separation between the two communities. Nothing's very serious. But in my opinion, something like that happened. So this is from a purely political standpoint, okay? Something that happened. And now you want to see a real case. So let me tell you, before going into a couple of other events, other episodes involving music and concerning music more, directly and deeply, what is Jewish music? Sorry for going back to the main point, but it's interesting. We need to go a bit up and down, move forward and backwards. Jewish music cannot be defined in semantic terms. Most of us have in mind specific repertoires. So if you ask an Italian person, a normal middle-learned person, if you ask, do you know Jewish music? If this person is not entirely anti-Jewish today, which is not rarely happening, okay, he or she will tell you, I like Jewish music. I like klezmer. Beautiful. Oh, super. But klezmer has nothing to do with Italy. Nothing at all. I mean, we had some German Jews, Ashkenazi Jews, and the repertoire survived, but the klezmer is not necessarily the Jewish music repertoire. If you ask someone living in other countries, or in Greece, in Corfu, or whatever, they might tell you, I know Ladino music, very beautiful. I do Judeo-Spanish music, very nice, romances, and interesting. They know only that. Rarely people are aware that Jewish music is sort of a composite, a very diverse mosaic, made up by different tesserae. So what is the definition? If we cannot define Jewish music in terms of music semantics, for instance, using minor scales or major scales or chords or instruments or practice, we can define it in terms of function. Yeah, it is the music you use during the service, mostly. But it is not only that. So in the early 20th century, around 1929, during the first Jewish Musicological Conference, some scholars drew down, they defined Jewish music as any music produced by Jews for other Jews as Jews. So the paradox is that today, even a jingle produced during a show in an Israeli TV is Jewish music. Oh, we should say it also that Israeli TV and media are not only Jewish. Okay, we have a lot of non-Jewish people, thanks God. So the definition is very strict. It's very general, I would say, at the same time. But it is not based on semantics, on music semantics. It's not like defining classical music or Baroque music where something specifically stylistic is used. It's not like that. Jewish music is what the Jews produce either in the Holy Land or in the diaspora during the centuries for their own leisure or to pray, okay, among themselves. It doesn't mean that the non-Jewish music repertoire did not enter the Jewish milieu. Is the opposite, right? The opposite. And today I will show you how these exchanges happened. So the first example on your left side, sorry, I don't know how to remove all these lines. I have no idea how to remove them, okay? You see the red lines that I sort of, okay, scratchy things, okay, don't worry. So what happened in 1622 in Venice, in between 22 and 23, Salomon Rossi, together with Leon Modena, published the Ashiri Mashali Shlomo. It's a very, very famous event, a music event, a music case. I'm pretty sure most of you know it, but let me tell you why it's so interesting. This is one of the most beautiful examples of mixing between Hebrew text, basically the text of the prayers of the synagogue, traditional text, and a set of entirely different music. We're not speaking about contrafactum. It's not using an external melody combined with a traditional text. It's not vice versa, using a Jewish melody and for a non-Jewish text or for a non-Jewish environment or milieu. It's not like that. It's something more interesting. It's sort of a combination of two issues, two matters that never met before. What is the big difference? Now we will be listening to it, okay, a bit. Well, you know that Jewish music from a liturgical standpoint has a very specific character. And this can be defined in terms of semantics. Number one, traditional, I'm speaking about Orthodox traditional Jewish music during the liturgy is strongly monodic. So only one voice singing, okay, and mostly without female voices. If you want to be really Orthodox, you don't use female voices mixed together. Apart from it, the main point, the main musical point that Jewish music comes from the logos, comes from the words. Music supports the prayer. It means that it's generated by the words. Now, I don't want to go into complicated things. You use music to recite the prayer. You use music to recite the Torah, right? With the te'amim, with a different accent put on the top, on down, on the Hebrew text of the Torah. You know, the neomes or ta'amim, they are indicating melodic patterns or rhythmic patterns. So you need to use music either to recite, either to study the Torah, okay, or to read the Torah, ritually speaking. But music is intrinsically combined with the text, but is beneath the text. So one of my best friends, Enrico Fubini, is an established, music historian, I don't want to say inventor, but someone who studied very deeply 18th century Italian music, aesthetics of music, said something very interesting and very clever. Jewish music is basically logogenic, comes from the words, is created by the words and depends on words. Here we have something completely different. We have a set of prayers combined with polyphony. This is a big scandal. This is happening in the 17th century because two individuals are meeting together. Salomon Rossi, chord composer, violin player, also dancer, whatever, an inhabitant of the Ghetto Mantua who was de-ghettoized or somehow emancipated by the Gonzaga family because he was hired in the court. He was serving the Gonzaga court as composer. Nowadays we remember Salomon Rossi as one of, for his Asherim Shlomo. Well, but this is not the only thing that he wrote. He wrote many things. He contributed, for instance, to the development of symphonia, to the symphony as a form. He contributed to a number of other things from let's say, from a normal music standpoint. I'm using normally euphemistically, of course, I'm joking of it. But is remembered for writing these set of compositions. Vocal music, so basically polyphonic, men and women singing together, with a accompaniment of instrumental music. And it was meant to be played, to be performed during the prayers in the synagogue. So why this happening? This is happening in Venice, because this was printed in Venice, even though it came from Mantua. But this is happening, intellectually speaking and technically speaking, in Venice. Well, while in Venice, let me tell you very briefly, because in Venice you have one of the most stubborn supporter of learned music in the synagogue. And this guy is Leon Modena. Is Rabbi Leon Modena, an intellectual, writer, philosopher, an ambiguous person, very, eclectic somehow, very contradictory person. He wrote lengthy books against gambling, but he had lost a lot of money while gambling himself. He wrote pamphlet against playing the card, but then he was playing cards in the Ghetto. So someone very, very, controversial. You know that he wrote then also Storia dei riti ebraici, the history of the Jewish rituals, in order to explain to the people the meaning, the function, and the reasons why of the Jewish rituals. Something that is basically the first guide to Judaism for dummies, I would say. Something very simple, something approachable also by unlearned people. So Leon Modena was convinced that Jewish music was not only a legitimate form of, polyphonic music was not only a legitimate form of music, but he taught, according to previous writings written by other people since the 15th century in Italy, that music was lost by the Jews during the diaspora. And then playing polyphonic instrumental music, learned music, not only the type of repertoire you know by heart by listening in a synagogue, orally transmitted, but also the learned repertoire that you study technically, you perfection your technique years after years. That was one of the legacy of Israel, basically. The Jews, or they said the Israelites, whatever, they had lost knowledge of music because of the diaspora, eventually abandoning this discipline and living it to the Gentiles. So they justified the use of learned music by referring to the Talmud, by referring mostly, however, to the Bible. They used to say, and this is one of the leitmotif, theoretical, why the Levites and Kohanim, while the Kohanim were doing the service and the sacrifices, were playing music. Well, because music is illegitimate. In Solomon temples, they used to play any kind of instrument, wind instruments, trumpet, and drums, and so on, also string music, so whatever, harps and kind of violin, So as you know, in the Bible, you have a lot of names of Kinor, Tahob, whatever, these names are not, from a scientific standpoint, academic standpoint, perfectly identifiable with instruments. Archaeologists found many items that can be, we have a sort of a good probability that the instruments played in the Middle East area could be the same used, but also by the Levites in the temple. And we could also say that, that was polyphonic music. Yeah, it is. It could be. Certainly it wasn't entirely monodic, as in the synagogue later in the Middle Ages and the early modern period. But what we know about the real music, can we play it? No, we don't have enough information to do that. However, Leon Modena, following this tradition of intellectuals who in Italy wrote in favor of learned music repertoire, they said, listen, now we have to do that. We have to do that, and this is the good point. Now we'll be writing together. So what is the big problem? The big problem is combining the music writing with the Hebrew. Music moves from left to right, and while Hebrew goes from right to left. So how you can do that? How you can combine the things together? one of the solutions was to recombining the text in Hebrew so as to follow the music. So you will be reading each word from right to left, but then the sentence will be moving following the left to right movement. So this is the technical solution. Maybe easy, maybe obvious, but never done before. So this is the first time we find on a printed page Hebrew text and music together. We have a problem over here. We have a set of problems. A lucky one, as you know, as I mentioned before. We have polyphonic music, and men and women are singing together. Is that kosher? Is not. Okay, let's say close one or two eyes. We are in Italy after all. We have a lot of exceptions to the rules. We like it if the beauty is the main point. The other point, the main point, is when you pray using this music, you can't pray the traditional way. According to the rabbis and masters, the prayer in the synagogue in the diaspora does not replace the temple sacrifices and the service, the temple of Jerusalem. But if you pronounce every single word with your lips silently, but listening to what you listen to what you utter, it will be the same. So we don't have the Kohanim doing the services, we don't have the Levites, but you have any Jew pronouncing every single word and then somehow satisfying the requirements of goodness somehow. Okay, I'm making the long short. So with this music, you cannot do that. The unlearned individual cannot do that. They cannot recite this music. They cannot perform this music out of the blue because they go there. They need to study. They need to be professional performers. From this point of view, the experiment is a failure. Is a big failure. It's a failure, and it was because, as far as we know, what happened soon after the publication of these music, we don't know exactly how many times Rosie's music was performed. I have no idea. I mean, even Don Juan, one of the greatest, musicologists in the world, even his student, another giant whom I admire, greatly, Edwin Ceruzzi, they don't know how often was performed. Maybe never. Maybe they just tried something technologically interesting, intellectually very challenging, but that's it. Now we'll listen together just one piece of music. It is not a long, it's Keter. Keter means the crown, right? So forget all the halakhic prohibitions, the legal rabbinical, limits to this music. Listen to the beauty. One of the, I would say personally, apart from the fact that it's beautiful, but it doesn't matter. In these sort of place where we speak about musicology, beauty is not a point. You might like it or not, doesn't matter. From, I would say, Keter is the crown of God. When you see the crown of God, you have the face of God in front of you that is impossible to see. You see the crown, you see the rays, you see the light. So it's a mystical moment. I don't want to say that Rossi is able to represent in music this concept, but it's getting very close to it. Absolutely. So let's see. Can you hear?
No,
No?
Alejandro, Fernando, la música.
no, you try
Oh,
to in the share menu,
oh yes, I got
add
it. Just a second.
audio. Now,
Now, yes, working.
Just one word, Kete. I don't know if you like it or not. In my view, it is one of the most touching music, Jewish music I ever heard in my life. The mysticism, the idea of something appearing in front of you is translated in music in magnificent terms. Okay, but maybe it's personal. I don't know. It's I don't know. So, but what is clearly evident, it's super apparent, is that this cannot be done but by professional performers. Non-learned, super learned. You cannot do that if you don't study ears. So if you put his music in a synagogue, this synagogue will become, phonically speaking, something completely different. Functionally speaking, this is a disaster. I normally attend Orthodox services, right? Imagine as you, I also know I went sometimes to conservative and reformed synagogues, and I saw the difference. The music performed, let's say, for instance, I like it very much, enormously, Park Avenue. Park Avenue and other Masorti and Reformed synagogues, they have music coming from the instruments, and people are supposed to sing together, but they can also not doing that. There is a sort of discrepancy between the text and the music, the people and the music. So from this point of view, phonically speaking, the synagogue is becoming something different. Now, bear in mind the idea of becoming something different. This is absolutely super important in our analysis, okay? Now, once again, Leo Modena justified beautifully with the long text. There was a sort of a preface to the text, justifying the use of learned music. And a lot of rabbis in Venice, 5 rabbis, signed the document declaring not only the legitimacy of this music, but also the producer copyright, say that this music will be up on Salmo Rossi for 10 years, and nobody is allowed to copy or to imitate it. Interesting to know. So formally we have a recognition, legal and I would say moral at the same time. So then we have another example, something that is not musical, but has to do with the function of music. And it goes back to a text that was written, it was written long before its publication, because this text, Via della Fede, Derech Emunah, was written by Giulio Morosini. Giulio Morosini is a Catholic priest, but he converted. He was one of the pupils of Leon Modena. He was a great scholar in the yeshiva, one of the best students. But then eventually he decided to convert, and he became a priest. He wrote a lengthy, it's a big volume called Via della Fede, the direction of the faith, or whatever, the meaning of faith and how, whatever. And what is the aim of this big book? Is to explain the rituals of the Jews, like his teacher, Leon Modena, had done before, but not only in order to explain and to display the rituals of the Jews, but also to show to the people, especially to the Jews, how these rituals, in comparison to the Christian rituals, were completely meaningless. So this is the double sort of problems. I introduce, I describe the rituals in order to despise them, in order to negate their legitimacy. While doing that, it's a typical approach of a neophyte. Giulio Morosini gives us a lot of details about Jewish life, because he was a Jew. He lived in the Ghetto of Venice. He was attending the Italian nation, or the so-called Nazione Italiana service of the Italian synagogue. So he knows the life very well directly. He's not mediating or taking information from someone. He's explaining it. So he died before the publication of this book that was published in 1683. But in this lengthy book, we have an episode which is absolutely fantastic, absolutely amazing from a musical standpoint. I'll be reading it in Italian, just a bit, not all of it. It says, io mi ricordo bene di quello che a tempi miei successe in Venezia del 1628. I remember what happened in Venice on my times, when I was young, basically, in Venice in 1628. 28 is basically 6 years after the publication of Rossi's Asherim. Okay, so the tradition of polyphonic learned music disappeared, it seems that something did not disappear. No, è in circa, se non erro, quando da Mantova, per causa della guerra, fuggiti gli ebrei se ne vennero a Venezia. When, around that time, because of the war in Mantova, when the imperial forces conquered the city of Mantova, Jewish musicians came to Venice. So, once again, Salomon Rossi is from Mantua. Other people are coming from Mantua to Venice, maybe because Salomon Rossi was served as a sort of a bridge, or, he helped these people to come. God knows, maybe. While they came here, I'm summarizing the text, they went to Venice, they established some academies, Accademia di Musica. Basically, Academy of Music doesn't mean conservatoire. It might also mean something like that. The academies are normally academia in Italy in the 16th century, 17th century, are professional guilds where specific people are working together or transmitting this, professional secrets, within the circle of members. But in this case, academia is a wider space where people are invited to play, to speak about music. And we know that Leo Modena was head of one of these academies. The academy was also supported by wealthy people, by rich Jews living in the ghetto. And eventually, what happened during the Simchat Torah, okay, one of the most beautiful festivities of the Hebrew calendar, they means the Sephardic Jews organized a big event. And they brought a lot of musicians, a lot of instruments, violins, and many others in the Scuola Spagnola, the biggest synagogue in the ghetto of Venice. And they invited people. There were dame e signori, basically wealthy, influential people. Imagine, we might also think that some nobles, Venetian nobles, were getting into the ghetto to assist, to see these sort of a show, right? Where you see prayers and a lot of music. Okay, everything went well. At a point that people were so many that to put 2 guardians in front of the door to limit the entrance of people, okay? People were too many. Okay, the enthusiasm was so great that someone brought, you see the last passage over here, tra gli strumenti fu portato in sinagoga anche l'organo, il qual però non fu permesso dai rabbini che si suonasse per essere strumento che per ordinario si suona nelle nostre chiese. Eventually, these enthusiastic Jews brought also an organ, but the rabbi said, no, that is not allowed. Halakhically speaking, is not allowed, yes, but why violins, why singing, why men and women together, why the organ not? Because it's an instrument that is played in the churches. Imagine what it means from a psychological standpoint, listening to an organ being played in a synagogue. You are diverting your psychological focus from synagogue toward a church. Not a scandal for us today, I would say, but in terms of identity, you are forcing a sort of a switch from the Jewish center focus to something external. Music is fine. Fashionable music is fine. We will see later that Venetian Jews are adopting, making their own, the music played in the churches, as long as this repertoire doesn't identify uniquely with the churches. We will see later, okay? So this is what happens. So from a psychological standpoint, from a phonic standpoint, the synagogue is becoming different. And then at this point, the rabbi will say, no. We don't have a technical problem over here. We don't have a legal problem, legal/halakhic problem, or rabbinical whatever problem. We have a moral, I would say even more, psychological problem. You have a problem of understanding what is happening over here. It's like switching. It's like speaking to another language. Something is becoming more complicated. And then at that point, the rabbi said, no. Now, Giulio Morosini is a funny guy. He's a bit nasty with the Jews. He is co-religionists. But at the same time, he says, these Jews wanted to, in another passage, it's too long. But, these Jews had done anything they could do. They brought instrument and also the two choirs, you see? Due cori a usanza del nostra per li musici. Basically, they brought two choirs inside the synagogue. Why am I insisting on this detail? Because two choirs is better than one? No. The two choir repertoire is not a coincidence. It's something that was practiced inside the Basilica of St. Mark in Venice. It was the repertoire of Venice. It was not a repertoire of the Roman Catholic Church. It was the repertoire developed, preserved, performed only in Venice, only when the Doge was inside the Basilica. It was a repertoire with two sources of sound, right? One choir, another choir, and the only person who could listen properly, these two, I would say nowadays, stereophonically, this sound was the Doge in the middle, and the elite, and the Venetian elite, member of the Major Council or the Senate. Okay, so this is the idea. The Jews are not imitating necessarily the churches, are imitating the main repertoire of the city where they live. Okay, so this is super important. If you went to the synagogue, to Sephardic Portuguese synagogue in Venice, you will see a synagogue that doesn't look like a church. It's not true that synagogue in Venice looks like a 17th century church at all. We have a tabernacle around that looks like could be a Baroque tabernacle, but the form, the shape, the meaning, the organization of the space of the synagogue is identical to the so-called guilds, where all the so-called schole, the professional schools, where members were meeting together discussing about the secrets, their life and so on. It's different. It's not a churchy place. It's a fashionable place. Okay, so there's something absolutely different. But if we found a sort of a parallel over here. The other case happened almost 100 years later. Now it's the other way around. What happened with Salomon Rossi? External music entered the ghetto. Jews wanted to bring inside the ghetto the beauty of polyphony and madrigalistic style. Okay, here we have something totally different and opposite. So let me tell you something very briefly about Benedetto Marcello. Benedetto Marcello wrote in between 1724 and 26 a collection of music called Estro Poetico Armonico, Parafrasi sopra Salmi di Girolamo Ascanio Giustiniano. Basically, what is it? It's 50 psalms out of the 150 that you find in the Psalms as a biblical book, paraphrased in Italian vernacular. Why paraphrased and not translated? Now, it's a big issue over here. It's another big problem we cannot solve and we cannot deal, completely today, right now. In the 18th century, the Counter-Reformation wave is not as strong as before, but using an Italian translation of the Bible is not allowed. So people are not allowed to read the Bible in Italian. They are allowed to listen to the Bible in Latin or to be explained by priests. That's it. It doesn't mean that Italian translation were not circulating in Italy at the time. In some specific milieus, like for instance, the Protestant milieu, we have the first translation in Italian, very important, very beautiful, I would say. I still am using myself the so-called Protestant translation of the Italian Bible, very nice, very adherent to the text. But for the general public, the Italian translation of the Bible is not allowed. So putting in music an Italian translation of the Psalms is a scandal. So instead of doing that, Mr. Giustiniani, Ascanio Giustiniani, paraphrases the Psalms, and Benedetto Marcello put in music. Benedetto Marcello is, nowadays is known for his compositions. The Music Academy in Venice was named after him. Okay, but I studied that for a long time. But his main profession was a magistrate of the Venetian Republic. He didn't die in Venice. He died in the north, where he was sent to one of the Venetian territories in the mainland. He was a magistrate. He was a learned person. And he was also a composer, a very famous composer, very generous composer. He wrote many things. But nowadays, we will be mentioning only these. Estro Poetico Armonico. Yeah. Why is this interesting? Before For some of the psalms that he put in music, he used Hebrew melodies. Hebrew melodies that were taken from the Ashkenazi and Sephardic repertoire being performed in the Ghetto of Venice. Now, we have two towering figures who studied Benedetto Marcello's Estropoetica Armonica on the Hebrew melodies, Don Haran and Andrews Rossi, amazing scholars. You know what is really interesting that Edwin told me, Professor Rossi told me that when he published his lengthy article, it's not an article, it's sort of a booklet. It's a beautiful, very complete study of these melodies, comparing the melodies with modern recordings done later. Well, we don't have time to do that, to discuss today. At the same time, he published the article. Don Haran, his master or his teacher, published an almost identical study, different in terms of organization, but results were the same. The result is that the melodies used by Benedetto Marcello are the same that we listen to the late 1950s recordings done in Venice. So it seems that these melodies were really the melody used in the Ghetto of Venice. There is no doubt about it. Even though today we don't sing these melodies, also because the German Ashkenazi synagogue disappeared, or the ritual was absorbed by the Sephardic after World War II, of course, there was a problem of people, numbers. The movement, the segment, whatever, the physiognomy of this melody completely represent perfectly the original physiognomy of the melody sung in the ghetto. So was he going to the ghetto listening and transcribing? It might be. His house was not that far from the ghetto. Basically, his house is where I live nowadays here in Venice. It's basically maybe 5 minutes walking from the ghetto. It doesn't mean that this physical geographical proximity brought him inside the ghetto. It could be that someone transcribed the melodies for him and then he put it into music. Okay, doesn't matter. We don't know. We cannot solve the problem. It's a good hypothesis that he sent someone and someone transcribed. A good hypothesis that he went to the synagogue. After all, even though in spite of the law, of the rules, many people were going to the ghetto, as we have seen before with the event of the Simchat Torah. We know even priests went to listen to Le Modernas preaching because they wanted to know, things about the meaning and of the Bible and so on. So noble people, we're pretty sure, were attending services. This happened. We have memoirs of people going there, listening, describing, even foreigners, travelers going there. So that's something that happened. What is really striking and interesting in my view, and in other people's view, I would say, is that he took these melodies. He used to do that. He put a melody, the monodic line, on the top of the composition, writing the music from right to left, following the Hebrew text, with a perfect Hebrew text down the notes. Who does it? Who does today these kind of things? Well, ethnomusicologists. Those who go to listen to the repertoire of a specific minority, then they do anything in order to reproduce what they listen faithfully. Now we use the recording machines, right? Telephones or whatever, something like that. But in the old days, writing down, trying to do the best in order to maintain the physiognomy of the original melody. Okay, this is technically really important. It's not like Rossi, it's the opposite. Once again, not only in terms of music being taken, but also being, going into the ghetto. Graphically speaking, editorially speaking, something very complicated, but it did it in the 18th century. It was not that complicated. But there seems to be a lot of respect for these melodies. These melodies are not taken, like randomly used or misused or exploited anonymously and in order to make them their own. It's not like that. There seems to be a lot of respect, a lot of love to these melodies. In fact, every single psalm where these melodies are used, you will have first the pronunciation of the single monodic trait, and then eventually the elaboration with the paraphrases by Guido Ascanio Giustiniani. Now, we'll be listening just a few seconds from Shara Shernisgar, the door that will be closed, now is a modern edition, of course. Beautiful. Then he took the very famous melody, internationally known, I would say today, the Maozur. So this is the choir version. I want to try to see if there is any one. Okay, now I'm wrapping up and we go to the conclusions. What happened with this music? I mean, as we've seen from these, what I call event or cases, Jewish music cannot be defined in, as I said, in semantic terms. Italian Jewish music is even more complicated. In Italy, in the Italian peninsula, we have almost all the different variants, different minhagim that compose the diaspora. We have Ashkenazi, French Ashkenazi, German Ashkenazi, Polish Ashkenazi, Sephardic, Portuguese, Levantine Sephardic. We have a number of rituals that met together. We have, since the late 1960s and late 1970s, the Tripoli and the Persian rites. Okay, in Italy, we have then a number of others, minors. I want to bomb you with the information. But studying the Italian Jewish repertoire is absolutely, it's a sort of a prism. If you study what happened within the peninsula, you will understand. I don't want to say completely, but most of the things happen in the diaspora from a Jewish music standpoint. We don't have the Yemenite rites, for instance. We don't have other rites, but it's a very diverse, very fragmented rite. Now, wrapping up is important. Just a few years ago, while I was trying to create a database called the online Thesaurus of Italian Jewish Music that you can find online, I was trying to find sources. I was trying to find ancient manuscript. And in Cincinnati, I found a manuscript that you see in front of you over here. And it's written in a beautiful, no, it's not beautiful, very accurate Italian cursive script. Italian, it means in terms of Hebrew script, Italian version, type. It's a music for two choirs, for two canti. Two choirs means two choirs. So if the writing is Italian, if the choirs are double, what is it? It seems to be a fragment. This is just one of the many pages. We found a lot of pages over here of the fragment. It's basically a fragment of what Italian Jews in the Sephardic synagogue of the Ghetto of Venice were playing during the Simchat Torah, as Giulio Morosini told us. So that's something that comes together. You see all these remnants, the different tesseras are being glued together. You will see that something coherent is coming up. So the double choir is this. Sorry. Where is the double choir? Eccolo qua. Okay, we don't have time to play all the music, but we'll stop the sharing. So this is what happens. If you have questions, if you have criticism, something to add, please come forward. Thank you so much. Thank you a lot.
Bravísimo, óptimo, fantástico. Gracias, gracias,
Thanks
gracias.
to you.
Querido profesor Mancuso,
It was a
pues la
pleasure
verdad
for me.
que aprendimos muchísimo, bravísimo,
Thank you
bravísimo.
so much. Thank you so much. Let me tell you, I'll be writing in the chat if you want. We have a platform called the Online Thesaurus of Italian Jewish Music. Sorry, Italian Jewish Music. We created it. Basically, I was in Oxford with Edwin Cerruti, and it's a long story, but this is one of the most comprehensive online free platform for the study, use, listening of Jewish music in Italy. We have more than 3,000 almost entirely unpublished documents, manuscript recordings, many things covering almost the entire rituals, all the rituals in Italy, and plus the so-called colonies, sorry, but I know it's
Súper, súper.
so if you want to reach me for more information, I'm here, and that's it.
Profesor Mancuso, lasciamo spazio a domande o
Sure,
commenti?
sure, absolutely.
A ver. Amici,
Maybe it's too
è
late.
aperto, bravissimo. Bueno,
Super.
comienzo con alguna cosa, pero varias cosas. Ascoltando Keter, ho percepito una certa atmosfera che mi ha ricordato i neni delle ultime canzoni di Leonard Cohen, no?
Mm.
Este spirito, questa atmosfera giudaica nel Keter. Una otra domanda. Eh, bueno, en español se entiende, yo creo, se
Sí,
entiende
sí, sí,
todo, ¿no? Que
no hay
escuchando
problema.
Keter asocié con las últimas canciones de Leonard Cohen, sobre todo Hineni y el uso de lo sagrado, y había una atmósfera ahí muy particular. Y il violino, che sembra essere parte integrante del panorama ashkenazita, no? I
Mhm.
dipinti di Chagall,
Certo.
Perelman, Stern, è stato anche protagonista di questa epoca?
Not that many, I would say. If we refer to this learn composition, well, I don't want to say I don't like the idea of learn repertoire, but let's say classical, whatever. Yes, otherwise it's not a sort of a common instrument. It's nothing. It cannot compare to the violin or to the fiddler, you know, that you find in the Ashkenazi tradition or in the Yiddishkeit, something like that. It's not like that. No, at all.
Es una otra cosa.
Yes, it's a different
Em,
approach. Yes.
sí. A ver. Em, Preguntas, Pietro, domanda, Elías, Ágata, Javier, ¿querés preguntar algo? Lilian, bueno, voy,
Okay.
valiente. Bueno, voy con otra cuestión.
Grazie a voi di tutto.
El órgano, están paralizados por la conferencia, fue tanta información que es sorprendente, tutti, es comprensible,
If you
è
want, we
algo
can do,
positivo.
if you want, next time we can do a meeting or lecture on the organ in Italian synagogues. Because in the
Yes,
19th century, all the synagogues in Italy had an organ, and the repertoire is so vast, you have no idea. Yeah, I've identified more than 6,000 scores. They still have
yes,
to be studied.
sì, perché l'organo, no? Oltre alle voci femminili, come minacchia di modernizzazione, si è manifesto, credo, anche con il movimento di riforma nella sinagoga di Amburgo e con Abraham
Sì,
Geiger, no?
certo. Sì, sì.
In questo senso, hai la domanda. E ancora, oggi la integrazione della musica porta con sé o mette a luce altre questioni dogmatiche e teologiche, ¿no? Es como si el órgano y la modernización o la música o no, eh, pone en gioco, mete en gioco otras cuestiones, ¿no?
Yes, well, definitely. You know, the coming of the organ happened around the, I would say, the first half of the 19th century. The first organ being brought inside the synagogues in 1820, 23, 29, depends. In Venice was the big organ, the big one, the professional, the churchy one, 1894. In Rome, the same, you know, a bit later. Well, you know, we're speaking about professional churchy organs with 1,000 canes, okay? Let me answer your comments, very clever one, in a second. You know, the organ was controversial, but because of the enthusiasm for emancipation, unification of the country, and the Jews being allowed to be citizens or subjects, acquiring all the rights and becoming member of the administration, politicians, professionals, and whatever, and so on, all the boundaries were somehow overcome, legal, moral, intellectuals. The music, after all, is so beautiful. And remember that this happened when the opera was such a fashionable and common matter to everybody that, you know, for instance, well, I will tell you more next time, but playing Giuseppe Verdi's operas in the synagogue was perceived as either both an act of beauty, but also as an act of faithfulness to the state. So Verdi, Nabucco, Aida, all these, Nabucco more than any, all the
Éxodo.
others, the idea of the Jews, you know, crying for the lost country was absolutely went in parallel with the history of the Italian people in the 19th century when we became a unified country, but also with the Jews becoming, you know, being righted and becoming citizens or subjects of the crown. So that is something that happened. Rabbis opposed a bit, just a bit, but not that much. I mean, we found many, nasty comments by the rabbis, but at the end of the day, they said, okay, listen, that's fine, whatever happens.
Sì, 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 ancora oggi en los protestantes valdenses, en los protestantes en general, el tema de la música es una cuestión también, ¿no? Y lo de Verdi, fantástico, fantástico.
And
Una otra
I will
Nabucco.
follow Alessandra Pontecorvo's
Sí, sí,
suggestion
sí,
to
sí,
work
por
on the
favor.
organ. Definitely. Thank you
Ah,
so
sí,
much,
sí.
Alessandra.
Alessandra Pontocorvo. Y está
Nice to meet you.
Alessandra
Piacere.
en el chat.
Sì.
Ah, felicitaciones, auguris, felicitaciones. Toda Rabá, bueno, ahí está. Mazel Tov.
Benissimo.
A ver, bueno, la verdad que fue una conferencia increíble, increíble.
Molto.
Estamos todos todavía y además la música, el clima, la atmósfera. Bueno, creo que todos tenemos que procesar la información ahora. Fue mucha información, fue yo mismo pensar todas estas cuestiones. Impresionante. Y además, qué lindo encuentro con tantos amigos transatlánticos, una amicicia transatlántica. Así que bueno, estamos entre la
Assolutamente.
Argentina, los Finzi Contini, bueno, todo, la stessa cosa.
Grazie mille.
No, gracias. Y gracias, profesor Mancuso. Esperamos otra vez hablar sobre música, sinagoga, sobre Donolo, sobre filosofía. Bueno, hay que
Super.
reunirse y crear esta magia, como decía el Baal Shem Tov, reunirse, ¿no?
Absolutely. Yes.
Gracias,
Thanks, everybody. I wish you all the best.
gracias a
Toda
todos.
רבה לכולם. להתראות שלום.
A presto, sei gesund.
Yeah.
Bye bye, gracias.
Grazie a voi.
Gracias.
A presto.